After seeing an old couple rebuilding post-storm, the rich rancher said, "All stop now." The storm had come without warning, the kind that made even the oldest folks in the town shake their heads in disbelief. Dark clouds rolled over the hills like a heavy blanket, hiding the sun and bringing a chill that made the air feel thick and heavy. Rain began to pour, first in light drops that tapped gently on the roof, then in sheets so heavy it felt as if the sky itself was pressing down on the earth. Thunder roared in the distance, a deep warning sound that made windows rattle, and lightning lit the horizon, jagged and frightening. The town, nestled in a valley surrounded by fields and hills, seemed small and fragile in the storm's grip. In the middle of it all, Martha and Henry, an elderly couple, sat by the window of their small farmhouse. The house had been in their family for generations, a simple structure of wood and stone with a porch that creaked when the wind blew. Martha's hands, though wrinkled and thin, gripped the windowsill tightly, while Henry's eyes scanned the darkening sky. They had weathered many storms in their lifetime, but there was something different about this one. It carried a fierceness that made even Henry, who rarely worried, tense in his chair. The wind began to howl through the trees, bending the branches almost to the ground. Leaves and small branches smashed against the windows, and the old roof of their farmhouse shivered with each gust. Their livestock, sheltered in the small barn behind the house, made anxious noises. The cows mooed softly, sensing the disturbance, while the chickens huddled together, feathers puffed out. Henry rose slowly, his bones aching from years of hard work, and went to check the barn. Martha followed, bringing an oil lamp, its soft glow flickering against the heavy rain outside. When they stepped outside, the rain soaked through their clothes almost immediately, but they barely noticed. Their attention was on their animals, their home, and the little farm that had been their life's work. Henry pushed open the barn door against the wind, and the smell of wet hay and animals filled their nostrils. He counted the cows quickly, making sure none had wandered off or been hurt. Martha, despite her small frame, helped herd the chickens into a safer corner of the barn. Their movements were careful but quick, the kind that comes from years of practice and instinct. They had learned long ago that panicking did no good. Staying calm and acting fast was the only way to survive a storm like this. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of slowing. Water ran down the hill behind their house, turning the soil into mud and forming small streams that threatened to flood the vegetable garden. The old couple worked together, grabbing buckets to divert the water and protect what crops they could. They had grown these vegetables themselves, planting each seed by hand, watering them carefully and nurturing them through the changing seasons. The thought of losing all their hard work was painful, but neither spoke of it aloud. Words were unnecessary. Their actions spoke louder than any complaint. Inside, the farmhouse creaked and groaned as the wind rattled the doors and windows. Martha and Henry paused occasionally to listen to the sounds, knowing that the house was sturdy but still vulnerable. Memories of past storms flickered in their minds, the time a tree fell near the barn but missed it by inches, the long winter when snow piled high on the roof, and the summer flood that had come years ago. Each memory reminded them of their resilience, of the many times they had faced nature's wrath and survived. But this storm felt relentless, almost personal, as if it had a particular challenge meant only for them. By late afternoon, the storm reached its peak. Rain pounded the roof and walls with an almost deafening sound. Henry stepped outside to check the fences, which separated their pastures from the open fields. The wind tried to push him off balance, and the mud made each step treacherous. He gritted his teeth and pressed on, driven by the sense of responsibility that had defined his life. Martha followed, bringing extra ropes and tools, ready to secure anything that might break. Together, they moved through the sheets of rain, their clothes soaked, hair plastered to their faces, but their determination never faltering. The old oak tree at the edge of their property, a silent witness to decades of their lives, swayed dangerously in the wind. Henry looked at it nervously, knowing how easily a strong gust could bring it down. They both paused for a moment, catching their breath and watching the storm's power. Martha placed a hand on Henry's arm, and he felt a surge of comfort and strength from her presence. They had faced many challenges together, but the storm reminded them of the fragility of life and the importance of being there for each other. Night fell, but the storm did not abate. Their small farmhouse glowed dimly from the oil lamp inside, a beacon against the darkness. They returned briefly indoors, dripping wet and exhausted, to warm themselves and catch a quick rest. But the sound of the wind and the sight of the flooding fields reminded them that their work was far from over. Martha brewed a small pot of tea, and they drank it slowly, savoring the warmth and shared quiet words of encouragement. Even in the worst conditions, they found solace and companionship in the knowledge that they were facing the storm together. As the hours passed, the storm gradually began to weaken, leaving a trail of destruction behind. Trees were uprooted, fences were torn apart, and patches of mud and debris covered the fields. Martha and Henry stepped outside once more, tired but unbowed. Their home had survived, though not unscathed, and their animals were safe. They looked at each other and nodded silently, an unspoken agreement to start rebuilding immediately. The storm had tested them, but it had not defeated them. Their love for the land, their home, and each other had carried them through, and they knew that even the most powerful storm could not break their spirit. By the early hours of the morning, the rain finally stopped, leaving behind a world transformed. The farm was battered, but there was a strange beauty in the aftermath. Water sparkled on the leaves, broken branches lay like fallen soldiers, and the first light of dawn revealed a sky that was slowly clearing. Martha and Henry stepped into this new day, tired but resolute, ready to face the hard work of rebuilding. They had survived the storm, but now the real challenge began, restoring what was lost and continuing the life they had built together over decades. Across the valley, where the hills rolled gently and the sun struggled to break through lingering clouds, Gideon Hargrove sat in his large polished office looking out over the expanse of his property. From the inside, his ranch seemed untouched by the storm. The fences were sturdy, the barn stood firm, and the cattle grazed calmly in the pastures. But Gideon's mind was restless. Something about the storm unsettled him, even though his land had come through unharmed. He had built his fortune over many years, buying land, raising cattle, and managing everything with meticulous care. Now, to outsiders he seemed untouchable, a man with wealth, influence, and power. Yet wealth did not shield him from the awareness of vulnerability, and the storm reminded him that nature spared no one. Sitting in his office, Gideon could not ignore the thought of the smaller farms in town, especially those that had stood for generations, much like his own. Finally, he stood and walked to the edge of his property, feeling the wet earth under his boots. The air smelled fresh, washed clean by the storm, and he could hear the faint trickle of water running down the hills. His eyes scanned the distance, toward the town that had grown at the crossroads near the river. Smoke curled from chimneys, and here and there, people were already stepping out to assess damage. Then, in the distance, his gaze fell on a sight that stopped him completely. An old couple, bent with age but steady in movement, were working in the rain-soaked fields, their clothes clinging to their frames. Martha's head was covered with a scarf, her sleeves rolled up, and Henry was holding a fence post, trying to keep it upright while the wind threatened to knock it over. Gideon felt a pull in his chest. He had seen many people struggle, but there was something different about these two. Their hands were worn, knuckles scarred, and yet they moved with careful precision, as if their life depended on each motion. Perhaps, in truth, it did. Gideon drove his truck toward the town, the wheels crunching over wet gravel. The closer he got, the clearer the image became. He watched as Henry tried to secure a gate that had been torn from its hinges. Martha handed him tools, pausing only briefly to catch her breath. Gideon could see the determination in their faces, the kind of strength that comes not from muscle or money, but from years of enduring hardship together. It was a raw, honest determination, and it struck a chord deep within him. As he stepped out of his truck, the cold wind hit him like a wall, and he pulled his coat tighter. He had driven many miles in his life, but he had never felt the weight of a storm like this. Gideon approached the couple cautiously, not wanting to startle them, but also feeling an urgent need to reach them. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice steady but firm. The couple looked up, rain dripping from their hats and hair, and for a moment they seemed unsure whether to be wary or welcoming. Henry straightened slightly, recognizing the figure, but not immediately. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm, even though he was exhausted. Martha, standing beside him, gave a faint nod but did not speak, her hands still clutching a wooden post. Gideon smiled, a small, warm expression that softened his usually commanding face. "I saw what the storm did to your place," he said. "I wanted to offer my help. My workers, supplies, anything you might need." Martha's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in pride. She shook her head gently. "We'll manage," she said. "We've handled storms before, and we'll handle this one too." "Thank you, but we don't want charity." Her voice carried strength, tempered by kindness, and Gideon felt a mix of admiration and frustration. He had wealth enough to fix anything in moments, yet here were people who relied solely on themselves, refusing help even when it was desperately needed. Henry stepped forward, placing a hand on Martha's arm. "We appreciate it," he said, "but we've always done things our way. This land has been in my family for years. We'll take care of it." His voice was steady, but Gideon could see the strain in his hands and the tight line of his jaw. It was clear that the couple was exhausted, yet they refused to give in. Every movement they made, every action they took, was guided by determination, experience, and love for their land. Gideon's gaze swept over the broken fence, the muddy ground, and the rain-slicked roof. He felt an urge to step in, to make their work easier, to show the power of his wealth and resources. But as he watched them move, he realized that this was not about convenience or speed. It was about pride, resilience, and the quiet dignity that came from doing something with your own hands, even when it was hard. He decided to stand back for a moment, simply observing. Martha knelt down to lift a fallen piece of wood, and Henry tightened a loose post, sweat and rain mingling on his forehead. Gideon could feel the rhythm of their work, the silent understanding between them, and the way each movement carried years of practice and shared life. They were not simply rebuilding a farm, they were rebuilding a part of themselves, affirming that despite the storm, life continued, and they were capable of facing it. The wind blew stronger, and Gideon noticed small branches breaking off the trees, falling into the muddy fields. He instinctively reached for his coat collar, shielding himself from the rain, but he remained in place, unwilling to turn away. He watched them navigate the challenges of the storm with patience and care, and he felt a growing respect for their perseverance. Here were people who had nothing but their experience, love for each other, and dedication to their land, and that seemed enough to face even nature's fury. Gideon's mind wandered to his own life, filled with luxury, machines, and endless resources. He realized that money could never teach the kind of endurance he saw in this couple. They had no choice but to rely on themselves, and through that reliance they had built a strength far beyond what he had ever known. It was humbling and inspiring, all at once. He took a step closer, still careful to give them space, and considered how he could show respect without overstepping. Henry paused to catch his breath, leaning on a post. Martha handed him a small hammer, her hands red and raw from work. Gideon could see the strain in their bodies, yet the determination in their eyes remained undimmed. He understood then that this was more than a farm. It was a life, a story, and a legacy that could not simply be repaired by money. Every nail, every post, every step taken in mud and rain was a testament to who they were and what they had built. For the next several hours, Gideon stayed nearby, observing quietly. He offered words of encouragement when appropriate, and sometimes he simply nodded, acknowledging their effort. Slowly, he realized that he was learning something profound, not from books or business deals, but from two ordinary people who faced extraordinary circumstances with courage and dignity. By sunset, the rain had lessened, leaving behind pools of water and torn fences. Martha and Henry were tired, but their work had continued steadily. Gideon felt a mixture of admiration and quiet awe. Finally, he spoke again, this time more softly. "You've done a remarkable job," he said. "I wanted to help, but I can see you don't need it. You've handled more than most could imagine." Henry and Martha exchanged a glance, a small smile breaking across their faces. "Thank you," Martha said simply. "We do what we must. That's all." Gideon nodded, feeling a deep respect he had rarely experienced in his life. He realized that sometimes witnessing courage and determination was more powerful than any material gift. As he left that evening, heading back toward his own ranch, Gideon felt changed. The storm had left its mark, not just on the town and its people, but on him as well. He thought about the old couple tirelessly rebuilding their farm, and he knew he would carry that image with him for a long time. Their resilience, their unity, and their unwavering spirit had made a lasting impression. For Gideon Hargrove, it was a lesson in humility, respect, and the kind of strength that could not be bought but only earned through years of hard work and perseverance. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the rain-soaked fields, Gideon drove home, his mind alive with thoughts of courage, endurance, and the quiet heroism of two people who refused to let a storm define them. The image of Martha and Henry working side by side, drenched but unbroken, stayed with him, planting a seed of admiration and reflection that would shape the way he saw not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. The next morning the sky was clear, though the ground still glistened with the rain from the storm. Puddles reflected the early sunlight, and the air was crisp with a fresh scent that followed the heavy rainfall. Martha and Henry stepped out onto their property, their boots sinking slightly into the soft, wet earth. The storm had left its mark everywhere, broken branches, scattered hay, and mud tracks that ran across the fields. Yet, despite the mess, the couple moved with purpose, their eyes focused on the work ahead. As they began examining the fences and the damaged barn, a familiar sound reached their ears, the crunch of gravel under tires. Henry squinted toward the road and saw a large truck approaching. He straightened, a mix of curiosity and caution in his posture. Martha noticed it too and wiped her hands on her apron, her gaze steady. The truck stopped near the edge of the field, and a tall man stepped out. He was dressed neatly despite the wet ground, and his presence carried an air of authority. "Good morning," the man said warmly, but with a firmness that suggested he was used to being listened to. "I'm Gideon Hargrove. I saw the damage last night, and I wanted to offer my help." Henry raised an eyebrow, and Martha's lips pressed together. They had seen offers before, people from town or nearby farms who would come with good intentions but often overstep, trying to do the work themselves. It was not that they did not appreciate help, it was that pride and experience had taught them to manage on their own. Henry took a step forward. "Mr. Hargrove," he said cautiously, "we appreciate your concern. Truly. But we've handled storms before, and we'll handle this one too, our farmer way." His voice was calm, but there was an edge of firmness that left no room for argument. Martha nodded in agreement, standing slightly behind Henry, her hands resting on the wooden post she had just moved into place. Gideon looked at them carefully. He had expected some resistance, perhaps polite, perhaps uncertain, but he had not expected such quiet, unshakable determination. He smiled faintly, a mix of admiration and gentle surprise. "I can see that," he said slowly, "but sometimes even the strongest hands can use a little help. My workers are experienced. They can fix the fences, repair the barn, and make sure your property is safe for your animals. You won't have to lift a finger if you don't want to." She shook her head, the scarf around her hair moving slightly with the wind. "We don't want anyone else doing it," she said. "We need to do this ourselves. It's not just about fixing the farm. It's about showing ourselves that we can." Her voice was firm yet calm, and Gideon could hear the pride and love for the land in every word. Henry gave a small nod in agreement, though a faint shadow of worry crossed his face. Gideon's brow furrowed slightly. He had faced stubbornness before, in business deals, in negotiations, in the management of his own ranch, but this was different. This was not stubbornness born from ego or greed. It was determination born from decades of hard work, from love for the land and the life they had built together. He felt a deep respect for them, even as a part of him wanted to step in and make their burden lighter. He decided to walk with them through the farm, pointing out areas that had been affected by the storm. "That fence looks unstable," he said, nodding toward a section where the posts had been uprooted. "And the barn roof. Some shingles are missing. A strong wind could take more than that next time." Henry nodded, following his gaze, and Martha's hands tightened slightly around the post she had been adjusting. "We'll handle it," Henry said again. "It may take time, but it will get done. That's all that matters." Gideon could see the determination etched into every line of their faces. He realized that their definition of success was not speed or efficiency, but persistence, care, and pride in doing it themselves. It was something he had rarely encountered in his life of wealth and resources, where work could often be done with a snap of his fingers or a wave of his hand. For a moment, Gideon simply stood, observing them. He watched Martha climb carefully onto a small ladder to replace a broken plank on the barn, and Henry struggled to lift a heavy post back into place. Their movements were deliberate and careful, guided by experience and a deep understanding of their land. Every action they took seemed to carry the weight of years, not just in effort, but in knowledge, patience, and love. Gideon finally spoke again, softer this time, his tone almost reflective. "I've built many things in my life," he said, "but I've never seen a farm taken care of like this, with such care and attention to every detail. You have something rare here. It's not just a farm, it's a life, a story, and it shows in everything you do." Martha paused for a moment, glancing at him, her hands still gripping the ladder. There was no arrogance in her eyes, only acknowledgement of his words. "We know what we have," she said simply, "and we know what it means to keep it." Gideon felt a tug at his heart. He realized that no amount of money could replicate the connection they had with their land, the dedication that came from years of working together, through storms, droughts, and every challenge that life had thrown at them. He understood now that help was not always about giving resources. It was about understanding, respecting, and witnessing courage. As the day progressed, Gideon stayed nearby, offering advice rather than physical help. He showed them safer ways to lift heavy posts and suggested methods for securing loose boards without taking over the work. Martha and Henry listened carefully, sometimes nodding, sometimes shaking their heads, but they made the adjustments themselves. Each small success seemed to strengthen them. Each repaired fence and replaced plank a quiet victory over the storm's destruction. By afternoon, the sun was higher and the sky had cleared almost entirely. The couple had made significant progress. Some of the fences were standing firm, the barn looked more secure, and the animals were safe in their pens. Gideon looked at them with a mix of admiration and humility. He had come expecting to offer help, perhaps to fix everything quickly, but he had witnessed something far more powerful, the resilience of people who relied on themselves, who refused to surrender to circumstance, and who faced life's challenges with courage and pride. Henry finally paused, leaning on a fence post, breathing heavily. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying genuine appreciation. "Your advice helped, even if we didn't take everything. It's good to have someone who sees what we're doing." Martha nodded beside him, her eyes bright but tired. "Yes," she said. "You don't need to do it for us, but it's good to know someone cares." Gideon felt a warmth in his chest that he had rarely experienced. He realized that the couple's refusal to accept help did not come from stubbornness or pride. It came from love for their home, their farm, and each other. They wanted to face the challenge together, and in doing so, they taught him a lesson that no amount of wealth or power could provide. He nodded, a small smile spreading across his face. "I understand," he said, "and I respect that. You two are remarkable." As the day drew to a close, Gideon finally prepared to leave, but not before one last look around the property. He watched Martha carefully adjust a post while Henry secured a broken fence, the two of them moving in quiet harmony. The farm, though battered, was slowly being restored, and the spirit of its owners shone through every repaired section. He felt humbled, inspired, and deeply moved. Driving back toward his own ranch, Gideon could not stop thinking about the couple. Their determination, their patience, their courage. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. He knew he would carry the memory of that day with him forever, a reminder that true strength often comes not from wealth or resources, but from heart, resilience, and love. He thought about how small actions, guided by care and determination, could overcome even the fiercest storms, and in that moment, he resolved to honor that spirit, in his life and in the way he approached the world. The next morning, Gideon returned to the old couple's farm, his mind restless with thoughts of the previous day. He had left feeling both inspired and unsettled. Watching Martha and Henry rebuild their home had given him a new perspective on resilience, pride, and determination. But he also could not shake the sight of their tired, aching bodies, the small tremble in Henry's hands as he lifted heavy posts, the redness of Martha's palms from gripping rough wood. The couple was strong, yes, but even the strongest had limits. As he drove down the winding dirt road toward their property, Gideon thought about the meaning of strength. He had always believed that wealth and influence could solve almost any problem. His ranch employed dozens of hands. His equipment could move mountains, and his experience in business had taught him how to fix almost anything quickly. Yet he realized that sometimes even the best tools and resources could not replace the heart and courage of someone fighting to protect what they loved. By the time he reached the farm, the sun was climbing higher, casting a golden light over the wet earth. Puddles shimmered, reflecting the sky, and the air smelled of freshly turned soil and rain-soaked grass. Martha was already outside, gathering broken pieces of wood, while Henry adjusted a leaning fence post. Both of them looked exhausted, their movements slow but steady, their focus unwavering. Gideon parked his truck a little way off and stepped out, letting the crunch of gravel announce his arrival without startling them. "Good morning," he called softly, careful not to interrupt their work. Henry looked up, shading his eyes from the sunlight, while Martha glanced toward him, her face lined with effort, but calm. "Morning, Mr. S." "Hargrove," Henry said, "you're early today." "I wanted to check on you," Gideon said honestly. "And, if you're willing, I'd like to stay and watch while you work for a while. You've inspired me, and I want to understand more about how you do this." Martha exchanged a glance with Henry, a quiet communication that spoke volumes. Henry's lips pressed together, then he gave a small nod. "All right," he said, "but we still handle the work. You watch, you advise, but no doing it for us." Gideon nodded eagerly. "Understood." He watched them as they moved through the farm, noting how carefully they handled each task. Martha lifted a plank of wood and set it into place along the fence, while Henry secured posts that had been loosened by the storm. Their movements were deliberate, each action taken with patience, care, and a deep understanding of the land. Gideon felt a growing admiration with each passing moment. He noticed how the couple communicated with quiet efficiency, using only gestures and short words. "Hand me the hammer," Martha would say, and Henry would pass it without hesitation. Their teamwork was seamless, born from decades of shared life and mutual understanding. Gideon realized that their strength did not come from brute force or speed, but from experience, patience, and the bond they shared. After a while, he approached the leaning fence, the boards still loose from the storm. "That section might collapse if another strong wind comes," he said gently. "Would it help if I showed you a method to reinforce it without changing how you do it?" Henry nodded, stepping back to let him demonstrate. Gideon worked carefully, showing how to brace the posts using ropes and stakes, explaining each step in simple terms. Martha watched intently, her hands resting on her hips, then helped steady the posts as Gideon finished the setup. When the task was done, he stepped back and smiled. "It's still your work," he said. "I just provided some guidance to make it last longer." Henry studied the repaired section, his brow furrowed slightly. Then he nodded. "That will hold," he said simply. Martha gave a faint smile and patted the post lightly. "It's a good improvement," she added, and Gideon felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that sometimes the best way to help was not to take over, but to guide and support, respecting the pride and effort of those who had built their lives with their own hands. As the day progressed, Gideon remained nearby, offering small suggestions and watching the couple work tirelessly. He saw how they rotated tasks to conserve energy, how they encouraged each other with quiet words, and how every small success seemed to lift their spirits. Even in exhaustion, they laughed softly when mistakes were made, and they celebrated each repaired fence or restored section of the barn. Their perseverance was contagious, and Gideon found himself inspired to approach his own life with a new appreciation for patience, care, and dedication. By midday, the sun was high, and the heat began to make their work more challenging. Henry paused, wiping his brow, and Martha adjusted her scarf, her cheeks flushed from exertion. Gideon approached them cautiously, sensing the toll the work had taken. "You've done an incredible job," he said. "But even the strongest hands need rest. How about a short break? I've brought water and some sandwiches." Martha shook her head gently. "We'll take a quick rest," she said, "but only to catch our breath. The work is far from done." Henry nodded in agreement. Gideon handed them the water. They drank slowly, their movements careful. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the air filled only with the sounds of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional distant noise from Gideon's truck. After the break, they returned to work, and Gideon continued to observe. He saw how every task required careful thought, not just physical effort. Each fence post, each plank, each adjustment to the barn roof demanded skill, patience, and foresight. Gideon realized that their strength lay not only in endurance but in wisdom, the accumulated knowledge of years of living with the land, understanding its challenges, and learning how to respond. As the afternoon wore on, Gideon felt a growing sense of admiration and humility. Here were two people, with no machines, no large crew, no shortcuts, yet they were restoring their home with a dedication that far surpassed anything he had ever seen. Their spirit was unbroken, even when faced with exhaustion, mud, and the lingering reminders of the storm's power. He felt that he could learn more from watching them than from any book, any business lesson, or any amount of money he had spent in his life. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Gideon noticed the couple pausing for a moment. Their backs were bent, their hands red and calloused, yet their eyes held satisfaction. The farm was not fully restored, but significant progress had been made. Fences were standing again, the barn roof was patched, and the animals were safe. More importantly, the couple's pride in what they had accomplished shone clearly, a light that even the golden sunset could not outshine. Gideon stepped closer, feeling a deep respect and a growing sense of awe. "You've done more than most could," he said softly. "I came here to help, but I realize now that watching you is the most important lesson I could receive. You've taught me what strength really is." Henry looked at him, a faint smile tugging at his lips, while Martha's eyes glistened slightly in the sunlight. "Thank you," Henry said. "It's good to know that someone understands." For a long moment they stood together, looking out over the farm. Gideon felt a quiet revelation settling over him. The true value of work, of determination, of pride, and of love could not be measured in money or efficiency. It was found in the effort, in the patience, in the shared struggles and small victories that built not just homes, but lives. He realized that sometimes stepping in too quickly could diminish the very strength that made people remarkable. Gideon's mind turned over the events of the storm, the rebuilding, and the lessons he had learned from observing Martha and Henry. He saw how they had turned a moment of destruction into an opportunity for perseverance, how they had faced the storm's power not with fear but with courage and dignity. He understood that helping did not always mean doing the work for someone. It could mean standing back, providing guidance when asked, and most importantly, respecting their autonomy and pride. As the sky darkened slightly with the approaching evening, Gideon made a quiet decision. He would continue to offer support, but only in a way that honored their efforts and their resilience. It would watch, advise, and stand ready if truly needed, but he would not take over. Their strength was not something to be replaced. It was something to be respected and preserved. Finally, as the last light of day fell over the farm, Gideon spoke again, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "I think I understand now," he said. "Some things can't be rushed or bought. True strength is in what you've done today, with your own hands and your own heart." Henry and Martha nodded. their expressions reflecting a mix of humility and pride. They had faced the storm, rebuilt what was broken, and preserved the heart of their farm. Gideon stood a moment longer, watching the couple work, feeling a sense of awe he could not put into words. Then he turned toward his truck, knowing he would return another day, not to take over, but to witness, to learn, and to honor the remarkable resilience of two people who had shown him what it truly meant to endure, to persevere, and to protect the life they had built together. The morning after Gideon's last visit, the farm looked like it had survived not only the storm, but the test of resilience itself. The sun rose slowly, casting a warm golden light over the wet fields, making puddles sparkle and illuminating the broken fences, now partially repaired. Birds chirped tentatively, returning after the tempest, and a soft breeze carried the fresh smell of rain-soaked earth. Martha and Henry stepped outside, tired yet resolute, ready to continue the labor that had consumed them for days. Even though the major part of the storm had passed, the aftermath remained. Fallen branches littered the yard, the barn still showed signs of wear, and sections of fencing needed careful attention. The couple moved with methodical precision, their actions coordinated and practiced from decades of experience. Henry adjusted a loose gate post, straining slightly against the weight, while Martha lifted a damp plank to mend a section of the fence. Each movement was slow but steady, each action deliberate. Despite exhaustion, their determination was evident in every careful step. From the edge of the road, Gideon watched once again, parking his truck a short distance away. He had returned early, as he often did these days, not to take over, but to witness. The sight of the couple working together side by side had become a source of inspiration and reflection for him. The storm had revealed more than damage. It had revealed the extraordinary strength in ordinary people, the courage that came not from wealth, fame, or resources, but from commitment, love, and pride in one's own work. Gideon stepped onto the farm cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Good morning," he said softly. Henry looked up, shading his eyes, and Martha gave a faint nod. "Morning, Mr. Hargrove," Henry replied, his voice steady. There was no hint of impatience in their tones, only the quiet awareness of someone who had been through too much to waste words unnecessarily. "I wanted to check in," Gideon said, "and to offer again, if you truly need it, the help of my workers. I can bring supplies, tools, or anything else you might require." He paused, watching their reactions carefully. Martha shook her head slowly, a gesture that was almost automatic. "Thank you, but we'll manage," she said. "We've handled worse. This is our farm, and we handle it ourselves." Henry nodded in agreement, his gaze sweeping over the repaired fences and patched barn roof. "It's not just about rebuilding," he said. "It's about proving to ourselves that we can." He realized now that his wealth, his trucks, and his hired hands could never replicate the connection they had with this land. Every repair, every lifted plank, every planted post carried more than physical labor. It carried memories, pride, and the essence of their lives. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "I just want to make sure you're safe and have what you need, but I respect your determination." The day progressed slowly, each task demanding careful attention. Henry and Martha worked in silent harmony, communicating with gestures, short words, and the unspoken understanding that only comes from decades of shared life. Henry reinforced a fence post that threatened to lean again, while Martha carefully nailed down a plank over the barn's patched roof. Gideon remained nearby, offering advice when asked, and observing otherwise, taking in the rhythm of their work and the grace with which they navigated the remaining storm damage. It was during a particularly tricky section of fencing that Gideon witnessed the depth of their resilience. A post had been partially uprooted and lay precariously in the mud. Henry tried to lift it alone, grunting with effort, but it slipped slightly, sending a cloud of mud splattering onto his boots. Martha immediately came to assist, placing a hand on the post to stabilize it. Together they worked patiently, neither speaking much, coordinating each movement as if they had rehearsed it 1,000 times. Gideon realized that strength was not just physical. It was patience, coordination, and trust in one another. After hours of work under the warm sun, the couple paused briefly to catch their breath. Henry leaned against a sturdy post, wiping sweat from his forehead, while Martha adjusted her scarf and drank from a small water bottle. Gideon approached carefully, noticing the exhaustion in their movements but also the quiet satisfaction in their expressions. "You've done more than most could," he said. "I've watched you rebuild this place, and I'm amazed by your perseverance." Henry gave a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement and pride. "We've had to," he said simply. "Life isn't always easy, and this land is ours. We've protected it, and we continue to do so," Martha added softly. "It's not about the work itself. It's about proving that we can, that No storm, no hardship can take away what we've built with our own hands. Gideon felt a lump in his throat. He had witnessed countless acts of labor and dedication, yet there was something singular about this couple's quiet courage. Their work was more than labor. It was love, resilience, and dignity. He thought about his own life, filled with convenience and resources, and realized that the most profound strength he had ever seen came not from machines or money, but from heart and determination. For a moment he said nothing, letting them continue. Then, after watching Henry carefully secure a heavy plank, Gideon spoke again, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I think I understand now. Sometimes help isn't about doing the work for someone. It's about witnessing courage, respecting determination, and knowing when to step back. You've taught me more in these few days than any lesson I've ever learned in business or life. Martha paused, giving him a small smile. It's good to know someone sees it, she said. Henry nodded. Yes, he added. It's not always about speed or efficiency. It's about care, patience, and persistence. The sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the fields, and Gideon realized that it was time to make his final decision. He had come with the intent to offer help, but he now understood that the couple did not need intervention. Their pride, determination, and resilience were greater than anything he could provide with money or manpower. He looked at the repaired fences, the patched barn roof, and the safe animals, and he knew that their work, done with their own hands, carried a dignity that no outsider could match. Walking closer, he finally spoke, his voice firm and calm. Henry, Martha, I think it's clear now. You have handled this storm with courage, skill, and determination. Nothing I or anyone else can offer would make this better. I've learned more from watching you than I could ever teach, and I don't want to interfere with that. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then, with quiet authority, he said, I'll stop now. The words hung in the air. Henry and Martha looked at him, a flicker of surprise in their eyes. Gideon smiled gently. I'll stop. No more machines, no more extra hands, no shortcuts. What you've done with your own hands is enough. It's perfect, because it's yours. You've shown me what strength truly means. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence, listening to the soft rustle of leaves, the distant sounds of returning life, and the gentle whisper of the wind. The storm was over, the damage largely repaired, and a lesson had been learned that transcended fences, barns, or muddy fields. Gideon realized that true wealth was not in his bank account or the size of his ranch. It was in witnessing courage, honoring determination, and respecting the lives and choices of those who faced hardship with dignity. As evening settled over the farm, Henry and Martha returned to their tasks briefly, finishing small details and making sure everything was secure. Gideon watched, content to let them take the lead. The work was slow, careful, and deliberate, but it carried a weight that only years of experience and shared life could give. Finally, satisfied with what had been accomplished, the couple paused, leaning on their tools, smiling at the repaired farm and the safe animals within their care. Gideon approached once more. You've done something remarkable here, he said. Not just fixing the farm, but showing what human strength, patience, and love can accomplish. I'll never forget this. Martha nodded, her eyes bright with pride. Henry clasped Gideon's hand briefly, a simple gesture of mutual respect. Thank you for seeing it, he said. That's enough for us. As Gideon drove back toward his ranch that evening, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink, he reflected on what he had witnessed. The old couple had survived a storm, rebuilt their home, and inspired someone with wealth and resources to recognize the true power of resilience. He knew he would carry the lessons of Martha and Henry with him always, reminding himself that strength is not always about power, speed, or convenience. By the time night fell, the farm was quiet, peaceful, and whole again. The couple sat together on their porch, tired but fulfilled, watching the stars emerge one by one. They had faced the storm and prevailed, not through shortcuts or outside help, but through patience, teamwork, and unwavering resolve. In that quiet, golden light of evening, they knew that they had achieved something greater than repairing a farm. They had strengthened the bond between them, honored their life's work, and proved that determination and love can withstand even the harshest challenges.